Have you ever had one of those days where absolutely everything just goes wrong?
Oh, yeah.
And you find yourself looking up at the ceiling, throwing your hands in the air and asking, why me? I mean, we've all been there, right?
Definitely.
You spill your coffee down your shirt, you miss your train by like 30 seconds, your boss yells at you for something that totally wasn't your fault.
Right.
And you just feel like the universe has specifically singled you out for punishment. Well, I want you to take that feeling, that deep sinking sense of cosmic unfairness, and multiply it by about 1 billion.
At least 1 billion.
Because today we are going deep into a story that takes that exact human experience, that desperate cry for fairness, and stretches it to its absolute breaking point.
It really is the ultimate exploration of the human condition when it collides with just inexplicable tragedy.
Yeah.
We're looking at the story of a man who loses everything, and I mean absolutely everything, from his colossal wealth to his family to his physical health, for seemingly no reason at all.
It's brutal.
It is. But what makes this ancient text so enduringly fascinating, and why it's still studied by philosophers and literature professors today, is that it doesn't just present a catalog of suffering. It presents the agonizing, desperate search for the reason behind the suffering.
Exactly.
It strips away all the polite religious platitudes and asks the raw question that every single human being asks when the bottom falls out of their world. What did I do to deserve this?
And the mission of our depth dive today is to give you, the listener, the full story, the core arguments, and the ultimate mind-bending resolution of the Book of Job.
Without the heavy lifting.
Right. We know you reached out because you want the essence of this monumental piece of literature. You want the philosophical insights, but let's be honest, you want to be saved from having to actually sit down and read through 42 chapters of incredibly dense ancient poetry.
Especially since a lot of it is translated into very archaic English.
Exactly. So we are going to do that for you. Consider this your shortcut to being extremely well-informed. We're giving you a front row seat to the greatest cosmic debate in literary history, summarizing the core of this tale in a nice chat that respects your time.
And what a structure this story has to unpack.
Yeah.
If we look at how this narrative is built, it's incredibly unique for the ancient world. It's almost structured like a play.
Yeah, it really is.
It starts with a literal deal with the devil in a heavenly boardroom. Then it plunges down to the dirt of the earth and descends into a brutal, agonizing, almost claustrophobic debate between a broken man and his 3 friends.
And that debate just goes in circles.
Right, escalating in cruelty until it gets interrupted by a completely furious young bystander who just can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
And finally, just when you think the tension can't get any higher, it all culminates in a voice roaring out of a literal tornado to answer the man's complaints.
It is cinematic, it is philosophically terrifying, and it is profoundly raw. So let's jump right in and set the stage. We need to introduce our protagonist, Job. And I want to be really clear about how the text sets him up, because it's vital for everything that follows. The text gives us a very clear picture of who this man is right from chapter 1. He lives in the land of Uz.
That's right.
And the very first thing we are told about his character, before we hear about his money or his family, is that he is perfect and upright, and one that feared God and eschewed evil.
That phrasing cannot be overstated.
He isn't just a basically decent guy who occasionally cuts people off in traffic but donates to charity. He is the gold standard of human morality in this narrative universe.
The author of the text is not leaving any room for ambiguity here.
Yeah.
For the central premise of the story to work, you have to accept unconditionally that Job is entirely innocent.
Yeah.
There is no tragic flaw. He isn't secretly skimming off the top of his business. If he had hidden flaws or secret unconfessed sins, the entire philosophical weight of the narrative would instantly collapse into a standard morality tale.
Exactly. He is presented as the absolute pinnacle of human righteousness. And he's not just the most righteous guy on the planet. He is insanely, unfathomably wealthy.
Oh, incredibly wealthy.
If he were alive today, he'd be headlining Forbes. The text gives us the exact inventory of his corporate empire, and it's staggering. 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels.
500 yoke of oxen.
Right, and 500 she-asses. Plus a very great household, meaning a massive staff of servants and employees. The text literally calls him the greatest of all the men of the East.
He's a titan.
He is. He has a massive family, too, 7 sons and 3 daughters. But here's the detail that really stuck out to me, the thing that shows his extreme, almost neurotic level of piety.
The parties.
Yes. His kids, who are grown, would go and have these massive multi-day feasts, taking turns hosting each other at their respective houses. And Job, just in case, would get up early in the morning after these parties and offer burnt offerings for every single one of them.
The preemptive sacrifices. Such a brilliant, telling detail. Job says to himself, "It may be that my sons have sinned and cursed God in their hearts."
In their hearts?
Right, not even out loud. Think about the psychological profile of a man who does that. He's so devout, so meticulous about maintaining his perfectly upright status with the divine, that he is attempting to atone for sins his children might have committed purely in their internal thoughts.
It's wild.
It paints a picture of a man who is actively managing his spiritual portfolio with the exact same rigorous, zero-risk attention he applies to his vast flocks of sheep and camels.
Yeah.
He is leaving absolutely nothing to chance.
He is doing everything right, which makes what happens next so completely mind-bending and frankly disturbing, because the camera suddenly pans up.
Right.
We transition from this earthly picture of perfect piety and immense wealth directly into a cosmic boardroom. We are suddenly in heaven, and the sons of God, these angelic beings or divine council members, come to present themselves before the Lord. And casually strolling in with them is Satan.
Now, we really need to pause here because we have to translate this for a modern listener.
Yeah, please do.
The concept of Satan in this specific ancient text is very different from the later cultural baggage we've attached to the name. He's not presented here as a red-horned demon ruling a fiery underworld with a pitchfork.
Okay.
The Hebrew word used is ha-Satan, which translates literally to the adversary or the accuser. He's functioning almost like a prosecuting attorney or a highly cynical cosmic auditor whose job is to roam the earth and find flaws in humanity.
So when God asks him where he's been,
He essentially says, I've been patrolling the earth, going back and forth, observing what your humans are up to.
right, and then God does something that, if we're being honest, feels incredibly unfair. God actually points Job out to the prosecutor.
He singles him out.
God boasts about Job, using the exact words we read earlier. Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect and an upright man? God is basically leaning over the boardroom table and saying, look at my guy down there, he's the absolute best.
But the accuser immediately counters with a highly cynical, but honestly kind of understandable question. He asks, doth Job fear God for naught?
Wow.
Doth Job fear God for naught? If you remember one line from this entire deep dive, let it be that one. That is the central, explosive question of the entire text.
Because it challenges everything.
Exactly. Satan is challenging the very nature of human goodness and religious devotion. He's proposing a terrifying psychological theory. He argues that Job's righteousness is purely transactional.
Meaning he's only good because he gets paid to be good.
Precisely. He looks at God and says, you've made a hedge about him. You've built an invisible wall of protection around him, his house, and his corporate empire. You've blessed the work of his hands, and his wealth covers the land. So of course he worships you.
It's a lucrative business arrangement.
It's not genuine love or reverence. He's being compensated handsomely.
Let me play the skeptic for a second, though, because as a listener, I'm hearing this and thinking, wait a minute. The accuser is basically saying, take away the wealth, take away the protection, and this perfect guy will curse you right to your face. It's a cosmic wager, a bar bet in heaven. And God accepts it.
Yes.
God just hands over his most loyal, perfectly righteous servant to be tortured just to win a philosophical argument with a cynical auditor. How do we even process that?
It's deeply unsettling, and it's meant to be. The text doesn't shy away from the horrific implications of this wager. It forces you to confront a scenario where divine justice is essentially suspended for the sake of a cosmic experiment.
Right.
God tells the accuser that everything Job has is in his power, but he cannot physically touch Job himself. The hedge is lifted. And what the author is doing here is isolating the variable.
Testing the hypothesis.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you strip away all the rewards of faith, does faith itself still exist?
Yeah.
Is disinterested righteousness actually possible for a human being? Or are we all just behaving well because we expect a cosmic payout?
Well, the experiment begins immediately, and the execution is just brutal. What follows is an incredibly cinematic, rapid-fire sequence of destruction that reads like the darkest disaster movie you've ever seen, and it all happens on a single, ordinary day.
The pacing of this section is a masterclass in narrative tension. The text uses a compounding, breathless technique to simulate the sheer, overwhelming force of the tragedy hitting Job all at once. There is no time to grieve one loss before the next one hits.
Yes. Imagine you're Job. You're just sitting at your estate, minding your own business. Suddenly, a messenger comes sprinting up the road, completely out of breath, covered in dust.
Frenetic.
He gasps out that the oxen were plowing in the fields, the donkeys were feeding nearby, and suddenly the Sabaeans, which were these nomadic raiding tribes, swept down and attacked. They stole all the animals, hundreds of them, and slaughtered all the farmhands with swords. And the messenger looks at Job with wide eyes and says, "I only am escaped alone to tell thee."
And pay attention to the rhythmic repetition the author uses. While he was yet speaking, before that first bleeding messenger can even finish his horrific sentence, a second man comes running over the hill.
While he was yet speaking, messenger number 2 arrives. He's screaming that the fire of God, which we can assume means some kind of catastrophic lightning storm or meteor shower, fell from heaven and completely incinerated all 7,000 sheep and the shepherds watching them.
Completely wiped out.
And again, the man says, "I only am escaped alone to tell thee." So you've lost your farming empire, you've lost your massive textile empire of sheep. But again, while he was yet speaking, a third messenger arrives.
It just doesn't stop.
The Chaldeans, another vicious raiding group, formed 3 tactical bands, surrounded the 3,000 camels, stole the entire fleet, and killed all the drivers. "I only am escaped alone to tell thee."
If you look closely at that sequence, you'll notice how the disasters alternate. First, it's human malice with the Sabaean raiders. Then it's natural or supernatural catastrophe with the fire from heaven. Then back to human malice with the Chaldeans.
So it's coming from everywhere.
The author is systematically demonstrating that the destruction is absolute, coming from all possible vectors, earthly and heavenly. Job's entire economic existence has been wiped out in the span of about 3 minutes. But it's the fourth messenger that delivers the killing blow.
This part is so hard to even read. The fourth messenger arrives, and again, while he was yet speaking, he tells Job that his 7 sons and 3 daughters, all 10 of his children, were inside their oldest brother's house eating and drinking wine.
Right.
And a great wind came howling in from the wilderness. It struck the 4 corners of the house simultaneously, completely collapsing the stone building, and crushed all 10 of his children to death.
Devastating.
In a matter of minutes, Job goes from being a billionaire with a massive, thriving family to a man standing in the dirt with absolutely nothing. His wealth is gone, his employees are massacred, and he has to plan 10 funerals.
And this brings us to the crucible moment. This is the exact reaction the cosmic wager was designed to test. Will Job look up at the sky and curse God to his face, just as the accuser predicted?
Well, he has a deeply visceral, very human reaction to the shock and the grief. The text says he stood up, he took hold of his mantle, his outer garment, and he ripped it apart. He shaved his head, and he fell face first to the ground.
A classic display of ancient mourning.
But instead of cursing, he worshipped. He utters these incredibly famous, haunting words. "Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord."
It's astounding.
And just so we don't misunderstand his internal state, the author explicitly notes, "In all this Job sinned not, nor charged God foolishly."
It is a profound, almost superhuman demonstration of resilience. It is a complete categorical refutation of the accuser's hypothesis. Job's devotion was not just a fair-weather faith built on a transactional foundation.
He passed the test.
He acknowledges that everything he had, the money, the camels, even his children, was a temporary gift, and the Creator who gave them has the sovereign right to reclaim them. He passes the first test perfectly. The accuser is proven wrong.
You'd think that would be the end of it. God wins the bet, give Job his stuff back. But the story doesn't end there, because the cosmic prosecutor is absolutely relentless. We get a scene change, and we are back in the heavenly boardroom.
Another meeting?
Another meeting of the sons of God. God points out Job again, essentially saying, look, he still holds fast to his integrity even though you incited me to destroy him without cause. God actually admits here that the destruction was unmerited, but the accuser has a rebuttal ready. He looks at God and says, "Skin for skin, yea, all that a man hath will he give for his life."
This is a terrifying escalation of the psychological theory. The phrase skin for skin is an ancient idiom. The accuser is essentially arguing that human beings are fundamentally biologically selfish.
Right.
People can endure the loss of their possessions, their status, and yes, even the horrific death of their family members, just as long as their own physical survival and personal comfort are intact.
So they'll trade anything to survive.
He's saying a man will trade the skin of his children to save his own skin. He challenges God to touch Job's own bone and flesh, arguing that extreme, inescapable physical agony will be the thing that finally breaks his piety.
And again, shockingly, God agrees. He tells the accuser that Job is in his hand, but he puts one limitation on it. He must spare his life. You can torture him, but you can't kill him.
Right.
So the accuser leaves heaven and strikes Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. He is covered head to toe in an agonizing, disfiguring, highly visible skin disease. He is reduced to leaving the town, going to the local ash heap or the town dump, and sitting in the ashes.
It's awful.
He takes a potsherd, which is just a broken, jagged piece of pottery, to scrape the oozing sores on his skin to relieve the itching and the pain. It's the most pathetic, excruciating image of a human being you can conjure.
He has been pushed to the absolute edge of human endurance, and it's at this lowest possible point that we hear from a character who often gets a very bad reputation.
Yeah.
Job's wife. She walks out to the ash heap, looks at her husband, this formerly great man, sitting in the garbage, scraping his infected sores, having just buried their 10 children, and she says to him, "Dost thou still retain thine integrity? Curse God and die."
Those words are so stark. Curse God and die. And you're right, historically, commentators have judged her really harshly for this, calling her a tool of Satan. But honestly, can we take a step back and have some empathy here?
Absolutely.
Imagine you are her. She just lost the exact same 10 children that Job did. Her heart is equally shattered. She lost the exact same wealth and social standing. And now, on top of all her own trauma, she has to watch the man she loves suffer an unending, pointless physical agony.
Yeah, she's not being evil.
Right. She's offering him the only merciful exit she can see. She knows that cursing God is a capital offense in their theology. She's essentially telling him to commit theological suicide so the pain will finally stop.
That's a very compassionate, accurate reading. Her reaction is a deeply realistic, understandable human response to insurmountable, senseless pain. She represents the voice of pragmatic despair.
But Job pushes back.
He does. Job's response to her is what anchors his character's integrity in this early part of the book. He doesn't yell at her, but he calls her words foolish meaning, lacking in spiritual wisdom. And he asks her a rhetorical question that frames his entire resolute worldview at this moment. What? Shall we receive good at the hand of God, and shall we not receive evil?
No.
He refuses to accept a shallow theology where God is only the source of positive things and sunshine. He accepts that the divine will is sovereign over the darkness too. And again, the text confirms he did not sin with his lips.
So Job is sitting there in the ashes, scraping himself, and news of this total catastrophic downfall spreads across the region. His 3 closest friends hear about it, and they coordinate to come and mourn with him. We're introduced to Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, and Zophar the Naamathite.
The 3 friends.
And when they approach the town dump and see him from afar off, he is so physically disfigured by the disease and the grief that they literally do not recognize their own best friend. When they realize it's him, they burst into tears, they tear their clothes, they throw dust into the air and onto their heads.
Another intense display of mourning.
And then they do something truly profound. They walk over, sit down on the ground in the ashes with him, and for 7 days and 7 nights, nobody says a single word. Because, as the text notes, they saw that his grief was very great.
It's beautiful, really. This moment is often cited by counselors and religious leaders as the absolute perfect model for how to comfort someone in the immediate aftermath of a deep tragedy. The silent presence. In modern times, you see echoes of this in various cultural mourning practices, like the concept of sitting quietly with the bereaved. The friends start out flawlessly here. They simply share his physical space and his crushing sorrow without trying to fix it, without offering platitudes, and without trying to explain the unexplainable.
But listener, I want you to pause right here and think about the immense, almost suffocating dramatic tension the author has set up for us. We, the audience, have privileged information.
We know the wager.
We know exactly what happened in the cosmic boardroom. We know exactly why this is happening to Job. It's a brutal test to prove the purity of his righteousness to a cynical prosecutor. But Job has absolutely no idea.
None at all.
And his 3 friends sitting next to him have no idea.
Yeah.
How does this dramatic irony shape the massive 40-chapter debate that's about to unfold? Because we know Job is innocent, but as we are about to see, his friends are going to spend days trying to prove he isn't.
That dramatic irony is the psychological engine of the entire book. Every single argument the friends make, every piece of theology they quote, and every desperate, screaming plea Job makes to the heavens is colored by our knowledge as the reader, that they are all arguing in complete darkness.
They're missing the key piece of the puzzle.
They are. It makes their impending intellectual collision not just frustrating, but incredibly tragic.
So, after 7 long days of agonizing silence, the dam finally breaks. We shift gears from the prose narrative of the prologue into the sweeping, highly emotional, incredibly dense Hebrew poetry that makes up the bulk of the book. Job opens his mouth and he unleashes.
Chapter 3.
Yeah, chapter 3 is just a torrent of despair. He curses the day he was born. He says, "Let the day perish wherein I was born, and the night in which it was said, there is a man-child conceived."
The poetic imagery he uses here is fascinating because it's essentially a complete unraveling of creation. If you read the Genesis creation account, God says, "Let there be light," and orders the cosmos. Job is doing the exact opposite.
He wants to undo it.
He wants the day of his birth to be consumed by darkness, swallowed by the shadow of death, and covered by black clouds. He says, "Out of the night he was conceived, let the stars of the twilight thereof be dark." He wants his existence erased from the calendar. He is engaging in a poetic decreation of his own life.
He asks why he didn't just die at birth. He says if he had died when he was born, he would be lying still and quiet right now. He'd be asleep, at rest with ancient kings and counselors in the grave. He describes the grave as this great equalizer, a place of peace where the wicked cease from troubling and there the weary be at rest.
Total non-existence sounds better to him than his current reality.
Yeah, he is in so much relentless physical and emotional pain that total non-existence sounds like a luxury vacation. He cries out to the universe, asking why light is given to someone in misery, to a man whose soul is bitter, who violently longs for death and digs for it like hidden treasure but can't find it.
What's crucial to observe here is the radical psychological shift in Job. The patient, accepting Job of chapters 1 and 2, the guy who said the Lord gives and takes away, that guy's gone.
The pain broke him.
The pain has broken his stoicism. He hasn't crossed the line into cursing God directly, which would lose the wager, but he violently curses his own existence. He's demanding an explanation from the universe, and this raw, unfiltered, ugly outpouring of existential despair makes his 3 friends deeply uncomfortable.
Right.
The safe, silent mourning period is broken, and they feel a sudden, overwhelming compulsion to start talking, to offer answers, to fix the theology of the situation.
Which kicks off the first major cycle of debates with his friends, or, as Job will accurately call them later, his miserable comforters. Eliphaz the Temanite is the first to speak. And I love how he starts.
He tries to be diplomatic.
Yeah, he tries to be polite, basically saying, "Look, Job, we know you used to be the guy who comforted other people, you instructed the weak, but now that trouble has touched you, you're fainting, you're losing your mind." But then Eliphaz can't help himself. He lays down his core argument, which is the classic airtight karma argument.
The retribution principle.
He says to Job, "Remember, I pray thee, whoever perished, being innocent, or where were the righteous cut off? Even as I have seen, they that plow iniquity and sow wickedness reap the same."
Right. Eliphaz represents a very specific, rigid, traditional theological worldview. Good things happen to good people, bad things happen to bad people. Period. It's a closed system.
A simple equation.
Therefore, by simple, unavoidable deduction, if something this catastrophically bad, this mathematically improbable level of disaster has happened to Job, Job must have done something incredibly bad to deserve it. Eliphaz is looking at Job's boils and saying, the universe is a mirror. You are looking at the reflection of your own hidden sins.
And to make it even worse, Eliphaz tries to back up his rigid karma theory with this bizarre, spooky story. He claims he had a nighttime vision. He says, "In thoughts from the visions of the night, when deep sleep falleth on men, fear came upon me, and trembling, which made all my bones to shake."
The ghost story.
He describes a spirit passing in front of his face, making the hair on his flesh stand up. The spirit stops, there's silence, and a voice whispers, "Shall mortal man be more just than God? Shall a man be more pure than his maker?" I mean, come on. Eliphaz is pulling the ultimate manipulative card. I had a dream from a ghost that proves my theology is right, so you can't argue with me.
It is deeply manipulative.
He's essentially telling Job to accept his punishment and stop whining.
It's an argument from unverifiable authority, using a supposed personal revelation to enforce a simplistic, weaponized view of divine justice. He is trying to force Job to confess to crimes he didn't commit, just so the universe makes sense again.
Yeah.
And when Job pushes back against this, when he insists that his pain is heavier than the sand of the sea and he doesn't know why it's happening, the friends don't offer more sympathy. They escalate. Bildad the Shuhite speaks next, and he completely drops the polite introduction.
Bildad is brutal. He listens to Job's agonizing complaints and asks, "How long will it be ere you make an end of words?" He essentially tells Job he's just blowing hot air, speaking like a strong, blustering wind. He demands, "Doth God pervert judgment?" Meaning, are you calling God unfair?
Right.
And then Bildad says something so incredibly cruel to a grieving father, it actually makes me angry just reading it. He looks at Job, who was mourning his 10 crushed children, and suggests that if Job's children sinned against God, God simply cast them away for their transgression.
Unbelievable.
Do you hear what he's doing? He's literally looking Job in the eye and saying, your kids probably deserve to have that house fall on them. They must have been secret sinners.
It's a breathtakingly cruel moment, but it highlights the brutal extreme lengths human beings will go to in order to protect their own psychological worldview.
Self-preservation.
Bildad cannot accept a reality where innocent young people suffer randomly, because a universe like that is terrifying. If it can happen to Job's perfect kids, it can happen to Bildad's kids. It is infinitely safer for Bildad's own mental health to believe that Job's children were secretly wicked and thus deserved their horrific death than to accept that the universe can be chaotic, random, and terrifyingly unfair. He sacrifices his empathy to save his theology.
That is such a profound point. It's self-preservation masquerading as religious truth. And if you thought Bildad was bad, enter Zophar the Naamathite. Zophar chimes in, and he is the ultimate dogmatist. He tells Job straight up that he's a man full of talk, full of lies, and someone needs to shut him up.
He pulls no punches.
Zophar leans in and delivers the absolute kicker. He says to Job, "Know therefore that God exacteth of thee less than thine iniquity deserveth." Let that sink in. Job is bankrupt. His 10 children are dead. He's covered in agonizing, bleeding sores, sitting in a pile of garbage. And his friend tells him, you actually deserve worse than this.
It's astonishing arrogance. Zophar represents the rigid religious enforcer who has zero capacity for empathy. He tells Job that all he has to do is put away his iniquity, wash his hands of wickedness, and then God will lift his face without spot.
A simple, offensive formula.
The friends are trapped in a theological equation. Suffering equals sin. They see the massive suffering on one side of the equal sign, and they are trying with all their might to force Job into the variable of the massive sinner on the other side, just to make the math work out.
But I love Job's response. Job doesn't cower. He doesn't break under the peer pressure and offer a fake confession. He is brilliant in his rebuttal. He hits them with pure, dripping, ancient sarcasm.
It's okay.
He looks at these 3 pompous guys and says, "No doubt, but ye are the people, and wisdom shall die with you." Translated for today. Oh, wow. Surely you 3 are the absolute smartest people on planet Earth, and when you finally die, all human intelligence is going to vanish into the grave with you. It is spectacular ancient trash talk.
Job is deeply, fundamentally offended by their simplistic, rehearsed platitudes. He points out that what they're saying isn't some deep revelation, it's common knowledge. He says, I have understanding as well as you. I am not inferior to you. Yea, who knoweth not such things as these?
Everyone knows God is powerful.
Right. But he argues that their neat, tidy theological boxes do not match the messy, agonizing reality he is experiencing. He knows he is innocent. He knows he hasn't done anything to merit this specific, extreme, targeted punishment.
And he calls them out directly, delivering one of the most famous and accurate lines in the book, "Miserable comforters are ye all." He points out that their entire philosophy is fundamentally flawed when you look at how the real world actually operates.
He observes reality.
He says, "The tabernacles of robbers prosper, and they that provoke God are secure, into whose hand God bringeth abundantly." He's saying, open your eyes. Wicked, terrible people often do just fine. They get rich, they live long lives, they die peacefully. Job is terrified and deeply confused because God, whom he thought was a friend, suddenly feels like a fierce lion hunting him down without cause. And he refuses to talk to his friends anymore. He demands to speak directly to management. He wants his day in cosmic court to cross-examine God.
This profound shift brings us into the long, escalating middle section of the book, spanning from chapters 15 to 31. The friends become incredibly frustrated and downright hostile.
Because he won't give in.
Job's refusal to confess isn't just stubbornness to them, it actively threatens their entire understanding of how God and the universe operate. If Job is truly innocent, as he claims, then either God is unjust or God doesn't operate by the strict rules of karma they've built their entire lives and identities around. And they cannot handle that possibility.
So, because Job won't admit to any hidden secret sins, the friends do what desperate people do. They just start making them up out of thin air. Eliphaz, the guy who started out politely, completely drops the mask in his later speeches. He accuses Job of specific, heinous capital crimes.
He invents a whole rap sheet.
He says, "Is not thy wickedness great, and thine iniquities infinite?" And then he lists them. He accuses Job of taking a pledge from his brother for nothing, stripping the naked of their clothing, withholding water from the weary, refusing bread to the hungry, sending vulnerable widows away empty-handed, and breaking the arms of the fatherless orphans.
Which is true.
We know from chapter 1 that Job was the most upright guy on earth, but Eliphaz has to believe Job is a monster.
It's a textbook, ancient case of severe cognitive dissonance. When faced with empirical evidence that completely contradicts a deeply held foundational belief, people will often fabricate information or alter their perception of reality to protect that core belief.
So he's gaslighting Job.
Exactly. Eliphaz is essentially gaslighting Job. He is inventing a monstrous sociopathic past for him in order to justify the monstrous present he is experiencing. It is psychological violence layered on top of physical agony.
But Job refuses to be gaslit. He points them right back to the cold, hard facts of the real world. In chapter 21, he completely dismantles their argument that the wicked are always punished. He asks them, "Wherefore do the wicked live, become old, yea, are mighty in power?"
He points out the successful wicked.
He observes that their houses are completely safe from fear, their livestock breeds perfectly without failing, they send their children out to dance and play music, and they spend their days in wealth and go down to the grave in peace. He's saying, look out the window, you fools. The world does not work the way you are describing it in your theological textbooks.
Job is acting as a rigorous empirical observer here. He is elevating his lived experience and the observable reality of human history over their rigid, abstract religious dogma. He recognizes that the universe is far more morally ambiguous than they want to admit.
Yeah.
But what makes Job so compelling is that amidst this furious defense of his innocence and his devastating critique of reality, we also see these sudden, piercing glimpses of incredible, defiant hope.
Yes. It's stunning. Even while his body is literally rotting away, he says at one point, "My bone cleaveth to my skin," and he notes he's barely escaping with the skin of my teeth, which is where we get that phrase, by the way.
Right.
But right after describing his physical decay, he cries out, "For I know that my Redeemer liveth, and that he shall stand at the latter day upon the earth. And though after my skin worms destroy this body, yet in my flesh shall I see God." It's this desperate, unwavering, irrational belief that ultimately, somehow, the truth of his absolute innocence will be vindicated by the universe, even if it has to happen after he is dead and buried.
It's a profound moment of theological innovation on Job's part. In the face of a God who currently seems to be attacking him like a ruthless enemy, Job appeals to a redeemer, a goel in Hebrew, which in ancient culture was a family member obligated to act as an advocate, to buy back property, or clear a name.
Oh, that's interesting.
Job is demanding justice from a higher court, appealing to a hidden, just aspect of God to rescue him from the apparent, angry aspect of God. It's complex, brilliant theology born entirely out of pain.
And that fiery demand for justice leads perfectly into his final masterful defense, which spans chapters 29 through 31. Job is done arguing with the friends. He essentially turns away from them and files a massive, formal legal brief directed at heaven.
His closing argument.
He structures it beautifully. First, in chapter 29, he reflects on his past with deep, painful nostalgia. He remembers the days when God's intimate light shined upon his tabernacle, when his children were actually alive and around him. He talks about how deeply respected he was in society.
He paints a vivid picture.
He says when he went out to the city gate, the center of ancient civic life, the young men hid themselves in reverence, the aged stood up, and the princes stopped talking. Why? Not just because he was rich, but because he used his power for good. He says, "I delivered the poor that cried, and the fatherless. I caused the widow's heart to sing for joy. I put on righteousness, and it clothed me. I was eyes to the blind, and feet was I to the lame. I was a father to the poor."
He is meticulously establishing his character witness for the cosmic court.
Hmm.
He wants it on the record that he wasn't just ritually pure, offering sacrifices in private. He was deeply, actively engaged in social justice. He was the pillar of his community, actively protecting the vulnerable people that Eliphaz falsely accused him of abusing.
But then Chapter 30 sharply contrasts this beautiful past with his horrific present humiliation. Now, he says people younger than him mock him. He says they are the children of fools, people he wouldn't have trusted to sit with his sheepdogs.
How far he's fallen.
And now he is their song and their joke. They abhor him, they flee from him, and they don't even hesitate to spit directly in his face. It's a devastating, total fall from grace. He is socially radioactive.
And this all culminates in Chapter 31, which is one of the most remarkable chapters in ancient literature. It is effectively a formal oath of clearance.
An oath of clearance.
In ancient Near Eastern legal traditions, if you were accused of a serious crime but there were no witnesses to prove it one way or the other, you could swear a highly specific conditional curse upon yourself. You would list the potential crimes and publicly state, if I did this, let this specific terrible punishment happen to me. It was considered the ultimate binding proof of innocence, forcing the divine to act if you were lying.
And Job goes down the list. He covers absolutely everything, leaving no loophole. He says, if my step turned out of the way or my heart walked after my eyes, basically, if he committed adultery or lusted inappropriately. He says, if he despised the cause of his male or female servants when they had a grievance with him, if he withheld food from the poor, if he made gold his hope and trusted in his wealth, if he rejoiced at the destruction of his enemy. He lists all these potential sins, not just actions, but internal thoughts and motivations, and calls down horrific curses on himself if he's guilty of a single one.
Let thistles grow instead of wheat.
And cockle instead of barley. Let my arm fall from my shoulder blade. He is putting his life, his reputation, and his eternal soul on the line, swearing he is completely innocent. And he ends by holding up his invisible legal document and demanding that the Almighty sign it or answer him. The text concludes the section simply, the words of Job are ended.
It's the ultimate mic drop.
Yeah.
And with that monumental oath, the three friends finally fall silent. The text notes they cease to answer Job because he was righteous in his own eyes. They are completely deadlocked. Job won't budge an inch from his integrity, and they have completely run out of recycled arguments. The debate has flatlined.
Which sets the stage for one of the most surprising, almost comical shifts in the entire book. Suddenly, in Chapter 32, the camera pans to the side, and we are introduced to a brand new character out of nowhere, Elihu. The text gives us his full lineage. He's the son of Barashel the Buzite, of the kindred of Ram. And it turns out this younger guy has been standing just outside the circle, quietly listening to this entire agonizing circular debate for all these chapters, and he is absolutely vibrating with rage.
He is seething. The text explicitly says his wrath was kindled against Job because Job justified himself rather than God. And his wrath was equally kindled against the three friends because they couldn't find a solid intellectual answer to defeat Job, but still easily condemned him anyway.
So he's mad at everyone.
Everyone. Elihu has been holding his tongue this whole time because he's younger. He's been respecting the ancient cultural tradition that days should speak and a multitude of years should teach wisdom. He let the elders talk first. But now that they've failed, he's reached his absolute boiling point.
I love the imagery he uses to describe his own frustration. It adds this brief moment of almost humorous levity to a very dark book. He says he is full of matter, and the spirit inside him constrains him. He says, "Behold, my belly is as wine which hath no vent. It is ready to burst like new bottles." Or new wineskins.
Exploding wineskins.
He's literally saying, I have been holding in my opinions for so long that I am going to physically explode if I don't start talking. He just bursts into the conversation, declaring that great men aren't always wise and old guys don't always understand judgment. So he's going to show them all how it's done.
It's a very recognizable archetype. The arrogant, highly educated young person who thinks they have the silver bullet to solve a problem the elders couldn't figure out. But what's interesting is that while Elihu is arrogant, he does actually bring a somewhat unique, slightly more nuanced perspective to the table. He shifts the axis of the argument.
Right. How does his argument differ from Eliphaz's strict karma theory?
He moves away from the strict retrospective karma argument. The three friends argue that suffering is exclusively a punishment for past sins. You did a bad thing yesterday, so you got to boil today. Elihu suggests that suffering isn't always punitive. Sometimes it's preventative or pedagogical.
Pedagogical.
It's a disciplinary tool. He argues that God uses pain to act like a warning siren. He says God uses it to withdraw man from his purpose and hide pride from man.
Okay, so he says God speaks to people in dreams, or he chastens them with pain on their beds to keep their souls back from the pit. The idea is that maybe Job didn't do something awful yet, but he was getting too arrogant. And the suffering is meant to teach a lesson or prevent a future catastrophe. It's God using a megaphone of pain to get Job's attention.
Exactly. Elihu also focuses intensely on the sheer, incomprehensible scale and self-sufficiency of God. He challenges Job's legal mindset by pointing to the massive expanse of the heavens. He asks Job, "If thou sinnest, what doest thou against him? If thou be righteous, what givest thou him?"
What do you actually bring to the table?
Right. He's arguing that God is so infinitely far above humanity that our good or bad deeds don't actually impact the divine machinery. Therefore, God has no reason to be petty, vindictive, or unjust. He's emphasizing the absolute, untethered sovereignty of the Creator.
And here's where the scene direction becomes incredible. As Elihu is speaking, delivering this impassioned, slightly pompous defense of God's majesty, he starts describing the weather. But if you read closely, he's not just using metaphors, he's narrating a massive gathering storm that is physically forming right over their heads.
A literal storm.
He talks about how God makes small the drops of water, how the clouds distill rain, the sky gets darker. He talks about the noise of God's voice, the lightning flashing to the ends of the earth. He tells Job, "Hear attentively the noise of his voice and the sound that goeth out of his mouth." He describes thunder, freezing snow, and a violent whirlwind coming out of the south. It serves as this incredibly cinematic physical transition right in the middle of his speech.
It's brilliant literary stage direction. Elihu's speech builds in intensity, parallel to a literal meteorological event. The storm is brewing, the wind is howling, the tension is peaking, and Elihu is shouting over the thunder, commanding Job to stand still and consider the wondrous works of God.
Yeah.
And that terrifying storm sets the stage perfectly for the climax of the book. Elihu is silenced by the very phenomenon he's describing.
Which brings us to the moment Job has been demanding for 37 grueling chapters.
Right.
The court is finally in session. God arrives. The text says, "Then the Lord answered Job out of the whirlwind."
Finally.
Now, listener, I want you to put yourself in Job's shoes here. You have just submitted an airtight, massive legal brief. You have sworn your innocence. You expect the CEO of the universe to come down to the ledger, point out a specific sin, explain why your kids had to die, or declare you innocent and apologize. You expect an explanation.
Naturally.
But God doesn't answer Job's questions. He doesn't mention the wager with the accuser. He doesn't explain the suffering. Instead, God answers with a cosmic, unanswerable quiz.
And what a quiz it is. Chapters 38 through 41 contain some of the most majestic, awe-inspiring, and humbling passages of nature poetry in all of ancient literature. God completely ignores the courtroom dynamic Job tried to establish. He refuses to step into the defendant's box. He doesn't defend his justice. Instead, he challenges Job's fundamental competence to even question the design and operation of the universe.
The opening lines are just iconic. The whirlwind roars, and God says, "Who is this that darkeneth counsel by words without knowledge? Gird up now thy loins like a man, for I will demand of thee, and answer thou me." Basically, brace yourself. You wanted to interrogate me. I'm going to interrogate you. And then he hits him with the ultimate question. "Where wast thou when I laid the foundations of the earth? Declare if thou hast understanding."
It is the ultimate cosmic mic drop.
It really is.
God takes Job on a tour of the cosmos, starting with the very architecture of creation. He asks Job who laid the measures of the earth, who stretched the measuring line upon it, and what the foundations are fastened to. He describes a primal time when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy.
Beautiful imagery.
He talks about managing the terrifying chaos of the oceans, locking the raging sea behind doors, swaddling it in clouds, and saying to the waves, "Hitherto shalt thou come, but no further, and here shall thy proud waves be stayed." He's demonstrating a scale of engineering, control, and deep time that is unimaginably beyond human comprehension.
God asks Job if he has commanded the morning to appear or entered the springs of the sea to walk in the deep. Has Job seen the doors of the shadow of death? Does he know the street address where light dwells, or how to part the east wind? Does he have the keys to the storehouses of the snow and the hail?
A barrage of rhetorical questions.
It's relentless, designed to completely overwhelm Job with his own microscopic smallness. But God doesn't just stop at astronomy and meteorology. He brings it down to earth and takes Job on a tour of the wild animal kingdom.
This section is particularly fascinating to me because it focuses almost entirely on aspects of nature that have absolutely zero to do with human utility. The ancient worldview, much like our modern one, often assumes that the earth was built primarily for humans to use. But God asks if Job hunts for the lion to satisfy its appetite, or if he feeds the raven when its young cry out.
Right.
He points to the wild goats giving birth on unreachable crags, the wild ass that scorns the noise of the city and roams the wasteland, the wild ox that violently refuses to serve humans or plow their fields.
And the details he highlights are bizarre and wonderful. God brings up the ostrich. He says she proudly flaps her wings but leaves her eggs in the dirt, forgetting that a foot might crush them. He says she is hardened against her young ones because God hath deprived her of wisdom, neither hath he imparted to her understanding.
She's a terrible mother, apparently.
Yet God notes when she lifts herself up to run, she scorneth the horse and his rider. She's foolish, but incredibly, absurdly fast. And then he talks about the war horse. God asks if Job gave the horse its terrifying strength with a neck clothed with thunder. The horse laughs at fear, smells the battles from afar off, and charges gleefully into the spears and the trumpets.
So we have to ask, what is the point of all this? Why is the creator of the universe spending chapters talking about the weird habits of ostriches and the aggression of wild donkeys when Job is sitting in ashes, covered in bleeding sores, mourning his dead family?
It seems disconnected.
But the point is profound. God is showing Job a world that is incredibly complex, wild, diverse, and fundamentally not built entirely around human concepts of safety, fairness, or utility. The three friends, and even Job to an extent, assumed the universe was a neat moral machine designed solely to reward good humans and punish bad humans.
The karma view.
Right. God's tour of the wild reveals a universe that is beautiful, chaotic, terrifying, and operating on a logic that is entirely non-human and non-anthropocentric. God provides for the lion and the raven predators and scavengers. He delights in the wild, untamable things.
That really reframes things. If the universe isn't just a terrarium built for human comfort, then our demands that it always feel fair to us might be fundamentally flawed. And to hammer that terrifying point home, God brings out the ultimate monsters in chapters 40 and 41. First, he introduces Behemoth.
Behemoth.
God says, "Behold now Behemoth, which I made with thee." He describes this massive creature that eats grass like an ox, but has unfathomable strength in his loins, bones like bars of iron, and crucially, the text says, he moveth his tail like a cedar. Now, some modern scholars try to say this is just a hippo or an elephant, but a hippo has a tiny little flap for a tail, not a massive swaying cedar tree.
No, it doesn't fit.
This reads like some kind of primal, unstoppable, mythological beast. The text says he can drink up the entire Jordan River into his mouth.
Exactly. Attempting to classify Behemoth strictly as a known biological animal misses the poetic point. Behemoth represents the overwhelming, sheer, brute, physical force of creation. It is a creature of chaos that only God can approach with the sword. But then God moves to the sea, to Leviathan, which takes up an entire terrifying chapter.
Listen to the description of this thing. God asks Job, "Canst thou draw out Leviathan with an hook?" He tells Job, you can't make a pet out of him. You can't put him on a leash for your maidens. His scales are his absolute pride, shut up together so tight that no air can come between them. No spear or sword can pierce him.
And it gets mythological again.
The text says, by his neesings a light doth shine. Out of his mouth go burning lamps, and sparks of fire leap out. Out of his nostrils goeth smoke, as out of a seething pot or cauldron. His breath kindleth coals, and a flame goeth out of his mouth. This is a literal fire-breathing sea dragon. When it swims, it makes the deep sea boil like a pot of ointment. God calls him the king over all the children of pride.
In ancient Near Eastern mythology, the sea dragon, whether it was called Lotan or Tiamat, was the ultimate symbol of chaos, destruction, and anti-creation. The message here is staggering. God isn't slaying Leviathan in a panic. God is boasting about him. These terrifying, untamable, dangerous creatures belong to God. They are part of the grand, incomprehensible design.
So what's he telling Job?
God is essentially asking Job, Job, if you cannot even stand before Leviathan, a creature within my creation, if you can't put a hook in the nose of the chaos monster, how can you possibly demand to cross-examine me, the creator who plays with Leviathan? If you can't tame this sea monster, what makes you think you can understand, let alone dictate, the complexities of cosmic justice?
It's a completely overwhelming argument, which brings us to our final section, the resolution and restoration in chapter 42. After surviving this whirlwind and absorbing this overwhelming cosmic display of power and complex design, Job surrenders. And I want to be clear, he never gets a neat answer to the problem of suffering.
No explanation.
God never says, here is why your kids died. But somehow, The direct, terrifying encounter with the divine is enough.
Job replies to the whirlwind, and his tone is completely changed. He says, I know that thou canst do everything, and that no thought can be withholden from thee. He repeats God's own question back to him. Who is he that hideth counsel without knowledge? And then Job admits, Therefore have I uttered that I understood not, things too wonderful for me which I knew not. I have heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now mine eye seeth thee. Wherefore I abhor myself, and repent in dust and ashes.
He's humble.
Now, it's vitally important to note what he is repenting of here. He isn't suddenly confessing to the secret sins Eliphaz accused him of. He isn't admitting he deserved the suffering. He is retracting his arrogant demand that God explain himself on human terms. He's humbled by the sheer terrifying, beautiful majesty of the divine. He realizes his perspective was incredibly small.
But listener, right after Job submits, we get the greatest plot twist of the entire book. It's the moment that completely vindicates Job. God turns his attention and his anger away from Job and directly onto Eliphaz and the original two friends. God says to Eliphaz, My wrath is kindled against thee and against thy two friends, for ye have not spoken of me the thing that is right, as my servant Job hath.
Let's pause here and make sure we really grasp the magnitude of this statement, because it flips the entire theological premise of the book on its head. Think about what just happened. The three friends, who spent 40 chapters aggressively defending God, offering orthodox religious platitudes, and trying to neatly explain away Job's suffering to protect God's reputation, they are condemned.
God says they were wrong.
And Job, the guy who yelled at God, who complained bitterly, who accused God of being an unfair, fierce lion, and who dragged the Almighty into a hypothetical cosmic courtroom. God commends him. God says Job spoke what is right.
It is incredible. God tells the three friends they need to take 7 bullocks and 7 rams, go back to Job, and offer a massive burnt offering. And God says, My servant Job shall pray for you. For him will I accept, lest I deal with you after your folly. God essentially makes Job their priest. God requires these arrogant friends to physically go and rely on the prayers of the very man they spent weeks condemning as a heretic and a monster, just so they can be forgiven. It is a total, undeniable vindication of Job's honesty.
It's a profound theological statement.
Yeah.
It suggests that God deeply prefers honest, raw anger and painful, authentic questioning over dishonest, simplistic, rehearsed defense mechanisms that ignore the brutal reality of human suffering. Job's messy, furious demand for a relationship with God was far closer to the truth than the friends' tidy, cold, mechanical theology. It validates the human experience of protesting unfairness.
So Job prays for his friends, and the Lord accepts his prayer. And then we get the epilogue, the restoration. The text says the Lord turned the captivity of Job and gives him exactly double what he had before. Remember the inventory from chapter 1? He now has 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, and 1,000 she-asses. He is a double billionaire.
A double billionaire.
His brothers, sisters, and former acquaintances, the ones who abandoned him when he was sick, they all come back to his house to eat bread with him, and they all bring him pieces of money and gold rings to rebuild his fortune.
He also has 10 more children, 7 sons and 3 daughters. But there is a very specific, progressive, and highly unusual detail provided in the text regarding his new daughters.
Yes. The text actually pauses to give us their names, which is very rare in these ancient genealogies. The first is Jemima, which means dove. The second is Kezia, which refers to a sweet-smelling spice like cinnamon. And the third is Keren Hapeksh, which translates to a horn of eye makeup or antimony, a symbol of luxury and beauty. The text explicitly notes that in all the land were no women found so fair as the daughters of Job.
But here's the truly remarkable part.
Right. The text says, quote, and their father gave them inheritance among their brethren. Now, for context, in the ancient Near Eastern world, daughters generally did not receive an inheritance of land or wealth if there were living sons. The inheritance went to the males to keep the property in the tribe. This action by Job is highly unorthodox. It suggests a man who has been profoundly, fundamentally changed by his suffering. He breaks deeply entrenched societal norms to elevate his daughters, ensuring they have independent wealth and security.
It's a beautiful detail of restoration that goes far beyond mere financial restitution. It shows a man living with a new, expansive grace. The narrative summary concludes by telling us that Job lived another 140 years after this ordeal. He lived to see his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations. And he died, being old and full of days. He lives a completely fulfilled, abundant second life.
So we've walked through the heavenly wagers, the cinematic destruction, the miserable friends, the whirlwind, the fire-breathing monsters, and the final restoration. What is the takeaway of all this for you, the listener? By summarizing this ancient poetic text, we've seen a story that fundamentally violently rejects the idea of a simple karma theology where good things always happen to good people and bad things always happen to bad people.
Precisely. The Book of Job dismantles the transactional view of the universe. It shows us that suffering is not necessarily a sign of divine punishment or a reflection of personal failure. It validates our right to cry out, to protest, and to demand answers when life is brutally, inexplicably unfair.
But it also humbles us.
It does. It humbles us before the sheer untamable scale of a universe that does not revolve around our human desires for neat explanations and perfectly balanced ledgers. It asks us to cultivate trust and awe in the face of the deeply incomprehensible.
It's a massive, challenging perspective. But before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over on your commute or while you're washing the dishes. It's a mind-bending detail that is completely omitted from the book's ending.
Oh, that's a good one.
The text never, ever states that God told Job about the conversation with the accuser in chapter 1.
Never.
Think about that. Job lives the rest of his 140 years. He enjoys his massive new flocks, his beautiful new daughters, his incredible wealth, and his long, peaceful life. But he potentially goes to his grave never knowing that his entire horrific ordeal, the crushing death of his first 10 children, the agony of his skin disease, the betrayal of his friends, was all the result of a cosmic wager. A test to prove a point to a cynical adversary.
Right.
If you were Job and you eventually crossed over to the other side and found out the real reason behind your darkest days, how would that change everything?
It's a haunting question. And it's one that lingers long after the final page of the text is closed.
It really is. Well, thank you for joining us on this massive deep dive into the Book of Job. We hope we saved you some reading while giving you a lot to think about. Until next time, keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.